Saddle hunters, our brothers over at Tethered continue to kill the game by releasing innovative products. They just recently put out the Eberhard Series saddle. They also put out the Menace saddle, which is for our Husky brothers and sisters that are into saddle hunting. That saddle will do just maybe a little bit better job of cupping your quote unquote assets. But the thing that I'm most excited about is their recent release of the Tethered One climbing stick. This thing is crazy light, crazy strong, and crazy quiet. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and give you some specs. Each stick weighs in at less than 1 pound. That includes your Dynalite rope attachment. A 3-pack of these will weigh in at 2.7 pounds, which is ridiculously light. It's a 17-inch step-to-step single stick height, and there's an 8.5-inch step footbed, which gives you plenty of room for those of us folks with bigger feet. It's all made with aerospace grade titanium and aluminum for construction. So if you'd like to learn more about Tether's innovative products, head over to tetherednation.com and check them out. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 207. Today I'm joined by my buddy Wilson McSwain, and we're talking about Wilson's crazy success story and exploring new ground. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope you're out there filling some tags here as we kind of march forward toward the later part of the season. This is the second weekend of gun season. The first full weekend was new. Well, I guess it's been the second year that it's been new-ish. Gun season came in Saturday after Thanksgiving here in Pennsylvania. I think I hunted one day during that. And haven't been able to get out since. So today I actually had one more camera that was out in the timber and had to go grab that and pull it in and check that camera card. And unfortunately, I've had pretty good luck on public land, man, where I don't really talk about it much on here if I have something stolen or whatever the case might be. And knock on wood, historically I've had a pretty good run, at least around here, of having things be left alone. And this was actually the first year that I had a camera stolen on public around me. I would like to say it's kind of my fault because I hung it in an area where it probably wasn't going to be real hard to get to. I hung it up off the ground, but there was also a branch that was nearby that someone, even if they didn't have sticks or whatever, could probably, if they really wanted to, climb up and snag it. Had it over a scrape. And was wanting to see what was coming into this scrape that continually gets made every year. And it was in a spot where I had an encounter with a good deer last year. So I wanted to see, what the deal was, what time they were coming in, is it, what buck is it, what buck's in the area. And I had another camera not too far away. So I have an idea of what buck was making the sign. It's just a bummer that someone decided to gank it. So that was the first camera around here that I've actually had stolen. And so today I went in to grab another camera that I had let out because usually, I don't tempt fate in the earlier part of the season, summer, especially when there's stuff on the trees, you can kind of hide the cameras a little bit better and stuff like that. And so usually right before gun season, which kind of stinks, is I'll go in and I'll pull all my cameras usually and don't want to tempt fate of getting them stolen just because there's more people. I'm not saying that gun hunters do anything more so or less than bow hunters necessarily. It's just a sheer numbers game. There's going to be more people in the woods, higher chance of someone walking by the camera and seeing it, higher chance of someone deciding that they would like to have a new camera. So I usually go in and just pull all my stuff just so I kind of avoid all that. So I was doing that and I had one camera that I had left out that I just didn't get a chance to go snag. And so I went to snag that today. And fortunately, the camera was still there, but they took the SD card, which is almost worse than taking the camera. It's like what I really wanted was what was on the SD card. This was a new piece that I've not hunted before, and I was really just kind of letting a camera soak here because the whole idea was when I scouted it, I thought the sign that I had found was good. It looked like a bigger deer was making that sign, but it wasn't too terribly hard to access. It was a piece that might get overlooked. And I checked it earlier in the year, and I saw a couple people walk by the camera, and it was just one of those kind of out of the way places that, in some up against some really kind of thick, nasty cover, where I thought, you might be able to catch some cruising, if you could get a year's worth of intel and kind of time it right and know when to go hit it. And you're going to have maybe like a 3-4 day window of when it's going to be decent, before it gets pounded. And that was what I was kind of looking to gather. And, unfortunately, didn't get that. Really wanted to see like when does were going to come in that particular area, 'cause I thought that would be the best player for that spot. So SD card gone, which is kind of a bummer, but at least I retained the camera. So is what it is. You hunt public land, it's gonna happen. So I usually don't spend too much time dwelling or complaining about it. So that was my big outing for today. Have a cool show for you today. I'm just gonna kind of jump right in to the show. Actually, before I do that, two things I want to make a quick mention of. One, if you've not yet checked out the series or the 3-part video series of my hunt in Missouri, you can do that at on Tethered's YouTube channel. There's 3 different videos. We hit 3 different pieces of public, so there's basically a video for each piece of public that we went to hunt. So you can check that out on their YouTube channel. Also, I recently put out a kind of a mobile hunting gear video as well. It kind of goes. I basically go through all of my gear, because at that point I had just gotten back from my out of state trip and was kind of reorganizing all my stuff from the trip. And so while I was doing that, I thought I might as well go through and just kind of do this video that kind of outlines everything I take on a hunt, all the mobile gear that I'm using, what I use to hunt in state, out of state, and give you a sense of my layering systems and, what boots I'm wearing, bows I'm using, arrows I'm shooting, broadheads, like you name it, anything that I took on the trip with me, basically. I talk about and just kind of go over and put some links in the description on that YouTube video, so you guys can check out if there's anything in there that interests you that you want to check out to potentially pick up for yourself. So head over to the Truth from the Stand YouTube channel and check out that video. I think it's called Mobile Hunting Gear is the name of the video. And then if you haven't yet subscribed, and give the video a like. But with that, we're going to just go ahead and jump into today's show. Have a cool show for you today. You'll recognize this guy's voice. It's my buddy Wilson McSwain. He and I live here close together. Always love having Wilson on, man. It's one of those things where he and I, we live close together. We do get to spend some time and shoot and hang out together, and but probably not nearly as much as I would like to. He's just a good dude, and I like spending time with him. And he's one of my friends who just consistently kills deer, man. He's like one of those dudes where it's like, if you need deer killed, Wilson can kill deer. And so in my group of friends, this year it's been somewhat a challenge, I'll say. I know Chad and I've kind of lamented that on a podcast. But shout out to my buddy Bo Martonic. Bo killed a slammer just as of, I think, yesterday, which would have been Saturday. So congrats to him. Killed a great deer, and super happy for him, because he and I were texting back and forth just some of the woes we were having this year. So glad that some of my buddies are getting it done and filling tags, and hope you guys are too. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get jumped into the show. And as always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. Today, I'm with I feel like we do one of these about this time. Actually, I think we do it later usually. It's usually like early spring when we get together.
Yeah, before turkey season.
Yeah, right before turkey season usually. But you probably recognize his voice. He's been on here multiple times. It's my good buddy, Mr. Wilson McSwain, the legend, the myth. Actually, he's the one person in my group of friends, if you want deer killed, like, this is the guy you talk to, because he's gonna kill deer.
It's just what we do.
It's just what we do.
Or I guess, yeah, some people do.
Because Chad and I have been lamenting, along with John, which John hopefully will be on here in the next week or so, catch up with him. But just been lamenting how it's like this year's just been like. Did you ever watch Mike and Mike in the Morning on ESPN?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a story, and for anyone out there that listens to Mike and Mike, you might get this story. I wish there was the only sports show that I ever watched. I liked Golick because he was a former player or whatever, and I thought he was kind of funny. I didn't like Greenberg so much. I thought he was a whiny little snot, but Golick made fun of him, so it made it okay. But there was a guy in the NFL, and I forget what his name was. It might have been Albert Hainsworth that used to play for the Redskins, and I'm going to call them the Redskins. I refuse to call them the Washington football team. They're not the Washington football team. They're the Washington Redskins.
Classic.
So Albert Haynesworth, for anyone who doesn't know, was like this great player for Tennessee. Then he got traded, or not traded. He was a free agent. Washington picked him up, and they paid him a bunch of money. And then he basically turned into like a pile of crap, essentially, right? And when he got to Tennessee, like he was this great player, but he always had like this, like some type of mental issue or like some anger issues or whatever. But they never manifested themselves in Tennessee for whatever reason. Probably because he was an All-Pro and they were winning. Goes to Washington, they suck. His career's flailing, and they paid him a bunch of money. So he started like stomping on people's heads and stuff like that and getting ejected out of games.
I think I know what you're talking about now.
Right. So, and I think at some point he kicked the guy in the groin, right? and he got ejected out of a game, if I'm not mistaken. And so when Golick and those guys were covering it, they were trying to figure out how to say it without like saying, some vulgar word that you might use in a locker room or whatever, right? And he said, and he kicked him in the ding ding, right? So when someone asks me right now how my season is going, I'm like,
my ding ding.
I'm like, it feels as though I've been getting kicked in the ding ding since about September.
Oh,
so
boy.
that's basically where I'm at. It seems like for me, it's been like one missed opportunity and failure, whether it's like, I was 20 yards too far away, or I had a deer come in and didn't get turned around in time because I didn't react quickly. But that's basically been my season. On the other hand, you have Wilson, who just straight slays. He calls his shot. He's like Babe Ruth. He'll call me like, hey, I'm going out to kill deer tonight.
Yes.
And then I get a text message with like a picture of like a dead deer.
Yeah. I think you called me at one point when I was walking up on a deer.
I did. Your response to me was, it's really weird you just called me right now. I just put my hand on a deer's rear end. That was literally how you answered the phone.
Yeah. That was crazy because that doe, I shot that doe, and we're in a special regs unit in our state where we can buy as many tags as we want till they sell out, and we can hunt straight through from September to end of January, basically, because there's so many deer. So I always get a bunch of doe tags, and I shot this doe, and I knew I made a great shot. I get down, there's no blood on my arrow. So, and she ran kind of towards the neighboring property. So I went and talked to that landowner, and they gave me permission to go. But I went into town, got a piece of pizza because I wanted to give it time because there was like no blood on my arrow, no blood near my shot. So I backed out, went, got something to eat, came back. Now it's pitch black. It's like,
oh, I love the back end of this story. I know where you're going. This is this is hilarious.
It's
because I was on the phone when this happened too.
And now it's like 10 o'clock, and I now have to. It's a residential area, but where I hunt on the residential side, you have to walk through this huge cornfield. It's like the only farm in that area. So I walk down, find my arrow, get whatever, walk, find some blood. I'm like, oh, blood's great. Deer didn't go 20.
Dingo.
Dingo? Literally, I think it went like 25 yards. But I'm in the middle of this huge cornfield. You called, and I'm like, I just found my deer. It's pitch black. I have my headlamp on, and there was white fur around its butt. And I'm like, oh, man, a fox got to it or something. It was cold, so I wasn't worried about letting it sit for a couple hours. I answer. I'm like, oh, I just found my deer. And I hear shh behind me. And I turn around, and like 10 feet from me is a set of eyes from a coyote. And he was on his belly, like literally crawling towards me. And I'm on the phone with you, and I'm like, hey, get out of here. I like lose my cool, peed in my pants a little bit. You're like, what? And I'm like, the coyote tried to eat me. I'd never seen a coyote. Like, I've shot one coyote, but that was the only coyote I've ever seen. So to have one crawling up to you. Have you ever seen the movie Children of the Corn?
I have not, and I refuse to see it.
Yes, don't.
Yeah.
Only scary movie I've ever seen. But all I could, it literally looked like a small human was crawling towards me to eat me.
That's freaky.
I'm still terrified. I don't hunt nights anymore.
Right.
Like, I don't hunt evenings anymore. I get out. I'm like, it's still light. I got to get out of here.
You got to get out of here.
Oh, I'm terrified.
Yeah, man. It's, I don't think that, I don't know. I won't say that. I would like to think that, I don't know that they would ever, attack necessarily. I don't know that. I'm not 100% sure though.
I just don't know because my wind was blowing right at him.
It obviously
I smelled
didn't care.
like pizza. I stank.
Right.
And I'm talking on the phone with you. And then
I would say if
I just don't know what he was going to do because he was literally 10 feet away.
if their food is there and they want to protect their cash, like they might get aggressive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, I've seen them in the timber while I've been hunting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And as soon as they spot me, man, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but that's also been like, I've seen it, usually I've seen them in daylight, which is a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Because like they're a nighttime animal, right? That's when they do most of their hunting and stuff like
And
that.
with
So
my
I don't know if they
headlamp-
feel a bit more like emboldened at dark because they feel like they have the upper hand.
Yeah,
you know,
and
potentially I don't
with
know.
my headlamp, all I could see was his eyes until he stood up and turned around. That's when I realized it was a coyote. And so that was fun.
Yeah, so that was a good time. I remember being on the phone with you because you like literally like freaked out.
Yeah.
And now,
Hey, I'm really tough. If you're listening to this, I'm super tough, but I had a moment of weakness.
you did have a moment. You did have a moment of weakness. I don't even remember, when was that? Was I on my trip then?
No, it was October
Was it October?
or early mid-October.
It might have been mid-October. I don't
Corn
remember.
was still up.
This whole year has just kind of flown by, like the hunting seasons. Like I look at the calendar right now and I'm like, it's December already. Like the rut's over. I still am holding it. Like every tag I bought, I'm still holding. You know, at this point, you know, which.
And it's different for me because I started hunting I shot my first deer of the quote unquote 2020 season in March.
Yeah.
Because I was hunting for that agricultural program where they shoot deer.
Yeah.
In the summer.
Yep.
They have these tags. So it's been a weird year because I killed deer in March. I killed deer in August.
Yep.
And then the season started. I'm like,
you'd be all wore out, man.
Yeah.
Well, then you went through, I mean, you made a couple trips west. You did some fly fishing.
Yeah. I fly fished my way across the country, which was Corona started. And I drove out to Wyoming, and I think we did a podcast after that.
I think after your first trip.
Yeah.
Because your second one was more of an impromptu where you were going out to pick up a car.
Yeah. A relative needed a car driven from Seattle to Pennsylvania. So I flew out and fished in Idaho, Montana. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Fish your way across the country twice.
Yeah. And Michigan.
Yeah.
It was weird though, because like that was weird being in those like Western states. Campgrounds were closed down.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting trying to figure out where to stay and where to sleep. I slept in a church parking lot, and the pastor of this church comes out and knocks on the car window, and he's like, "Do you need some food, a place to stay?"
You know what I mean? With your beard, you do look kind of homeless. Ain't gonna lie.
I'm like, I'm fine. I'm actually on a road trip. He's like, yes, we all are.
We all are.
And I was like, oh man. I'm like, no, seriously, I'm okay. Like, I appreciate it, but I'll be fine.
Yes, we all are. We are all on our own road
Oh
trip.
man,
That's amazing.
and it was a super conservative, like, kind of church that you can't go to without like wearing a tie, kind of church.
Right. It wasn't like your church.
Yeah, it wasn't like a local church where you come in flannel. It was like he was like, "Do you need help, son?" And I was like, "I'm sure I do need some sort of help, but I'm good for now."
I'm not going to deny that there's probably something you could help me with, but at the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and take a nap. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's I don't remember. Did you antelope hunt on that trip? Because your intention was to.
I was going to, but the fishing was so good because
Nice.
I had connected with a guy in Wyoming he was like, "You don't have to pay your landowner fee, or something or other." I don't know how it all works out, but he was like, "I got a ton of does, and there's still permits available." So my goal was to make it to Wyoming to antelope hunt, but then I fished 2 days in Montana on some really famous places and was catching fish, and which was awesome. And then I hooked up with a guide and went on a float trip, which I've always wanted to do through some cool parts of Montana. I mean, I'm catching fish in between two herds of elk on either side. I'm like,
That's
this
crazy.
is I'm like, look up, bald eagle flying over. I'm like,
It's
this
like
is
America.
it. I call my wife and I'm like, this may be the end for me.
I just seen it all.
I've seen too much. So
That's awesome. Yeah, it's at that point you're like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
I can go.
yeah.
You know?
Oh man, I wasn't showering. I was fishing. Oh, so all my stuff was wet because like it was hot out. So I was just wading in my shorts,
Right.
which is fine. But then you got to get in your car and drive. And so, Yeah, I was roughing it, but I could care less. And
yeah, man, it's like those trips when you're doing those types of trips or out on hunts or whatever. It's like I'm typically like a pretty clean like freak. Like, it's like I like the shower. It's like one of those things where it's like I feel refreshed after I do or whatever. Especially like when I'm hunting and stuff like that and it's cold out or whatever. It's like there's nothing better than like a warm shower when you come home or whatever. But there's sometimes like in this last trip, because we were living out of the trailer, out of the little DIY trailer that I built. I built like a little DIY shower and I took a couple showers out of that, but it wasn't like something you wanted to rig up every day. And so you would kind of use it judiciously, right? So it's like maybe every third day you would use it.
It was like an event.
Yeah, because like you had to rearrange a bunch of stuff and set it up and then tear it all down. So, and I did take some truck stop showers while I was gone, and stuff like that. But
those always sketch me out. I'm like,
you know what? I'm going to give a shout out to Love's, man. Love's actually did it right in Missouri, like the place that I went to.
New sponsor of the podcast, Love's.
yeah, exactly. They had a really nice one because I was always kind of skeptical. Now, Chad from his rodeo days was very used to taking truck stop showers. Like I didn't know how to do it. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know like.
Do you have to pay at the counter?
You do,
okay.
Like because I didn't know. I was like, was this like a vending machine thing where like you go up to the door and you swipe your card and like the door opens and you go in? And, like what's the deal? Like how do you do this? And Chad's like, you've never taken a truck stop shower? I'm like, dude, I feel like I'm in the majority that would say no. Like
that's a normal thing to say no to.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not a trucker. I was like, and whenever I was in the band, like we would usually have like a place we were staying, like a hotel room or whatever that would shower, or we just wouldn't shower because we'd stay in the van and we would drive to the next town or whatever, or maybe the green room at the venue had a shower or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
So truck stop shower wasn't a thing, But him when he was in the rodeo, that was like where he basically showered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It was normal.
Yeah. And so he actually had to show me how to do it. Like, and he actually bought my shower for me because I was like, how do you do this? He's
this
like,
one's on me.
He's like, let me just buy you a shower because I feel like you're struggling,
Yeah, but I've said this, I think, in every podcast is like, for guys that get opportunities, say yes. If you are able, and it's not a burden on your family, to say yes. And that road trip when I fly fished was one of those, it was last minute, kind of threw out an offer to someone and they took me up on it. And you're like, oh, all right, I'm really flying out to drive your car back. And I had no agenda. So it was the first time I'd had a trip like that where I didn't have an agenda so I could camp or sleep or fish. I just knew I had to be home by a certain date.
Right.
And for a lot of while, I just didn't even have my GPS on. I just knew I had to go east. And I just drove east. And I'm like, oh, look.
Until you see something you like.
I could fish there. And I fished. And I grew up fishing, didn't do a ton of fly fishing, and it was fun to just catch fish. And
yeah,
I've perfected the making coffee with your jet boil while driving.
Don't try this at home, kids.
Don't try this at home. I do not recommend it, but it is like I'm very good at it now.
You're very good at it now. I got to kind of see this technique
because you have no agenda. You actually spend less time driving because you're bouncing around fishing or hiking or whatever. Then when you get in your car, you're like, dude, I got a motor.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have time to stop for coffee or go to the bath, do other things. And
so I just go to the bathroom in my jet boil and I boil it and I make my coffee.
Sanitize it and rock and roll, baby.
Right.
Conservation.
Yeah. That is the one thing about those trips. That was the one thing about this trip that I took that was probably unique and different from some of the other trips that I've taken. Like when I've gone to Montana in the past, like elk hunt or whatever, that was a very specific, like we're going to this place, we're hunting this, we're going to be here for this period of time. Right.
Yep. Where you're driving, the route you're getting, where you're staying, everything.
Right. And for this, last year to Iowa was like, I had a tag for the specific zone.
Yep.
Right. I knew I was going to hunt this specific piece of public. Didn't know where exactly, but I had a cabin, so I knew I was staying at this place.
Yeah.
Right. And everything was going to have to happen around or, orbit around that.
Yep.
This trip was, I knew I was going to Missouri and one other state. It didn't really matter when I got to which state. Well, it did matter whenever I got to Missouri because I was meeting my buddy Zach there, and then Chad ultimately was meeting us as well. So I knew I had to get there first. But where we went from there was just like, however we felt the hunting was going and whatever we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so we would spend 2 days at one place and kind of suss it out. And if we felt like it was going to get good or could be good, we would maybe spend an extra day. If not, we picked up camp and we moved, and we went to 3 different pieces of public, and there was no agenda. The only agenda was find deer.
Yeah.
And try to get away from people.
Yeah.
That was really the only criteria outside of that. Which was nice because it does a couple things. It frees you up a little bit, man. Like that was like, for me, I like freelance hunting, but that was like the ultimate in freelance hunting. Cause not only was I freelancing like on a piece of public, I was like just freelancing in the state. You know what I mean? Like I started in one corner of the state and I ended up in like the middle part of the state at one point.
Yeah. I actually purposely didn't text you a whole bunch because I knew I'm like, when you go out of state and you're trying to figure stuff out like that, it's like you don't really have a lot of time. So I text you a few times. I'm like, how are you doing? Where are you at?
Right.
And I got some text, but you just have so much going on in your mind because you are freelancing, but now you got to go, all right, I got to pack up right now and hit the road so I can get to where I'm going.
Right. Cause that was the only thing that you tried to be on a schedule with. You're trying to prioritize your daylight, really is what it comes down to, And so it's like, if you're going to move spots, it's like you're really trying to move, early enough. You need to try to make your decision early enough in the day so you can try to get to wherever it is you're going to go next. So you can at least get that afternoon to scout for a couple hours to figure something out for a morning setup.
Yeah.
That way you're not burning the morning setup. And then a lot of times you wouldn't be set up for very long that morning because maybe the intel is like lukewarm at best because maybe you only had 2 hours or so to put boots on the ground. And so you're really just scouting out a spot for the morning so you don't burn that gray light. To miss an opportunity. And then as soon as the gray light's gone, you're like, all right, I got to pound pavement and find the next setup for the evening and what I'm going to hunt the next day. Because we basically only gave each spot like 2 days.
Yeah.
We would scout in the evening, hunt the morning, hunt that evening, maybe hunt the next morning, and then we were gone. You know what I mean? And then we were off to the next spot.
Well, and it's cool because it's not like this is your first time going to a new place to try to find deer.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people listening, you may hunt the same spot over and over again. So that there's deer here, there's deer there. But when you walk into a public place and you spend a majority of your day banging around,
you're just trying to figure out if there's a proof of life.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
And sometimes you're like, man, one rub line and a couple day old scrape is not going to do it for me because there's so much else we can go look at,
Yeah. The other hard part too was like you're really having to qualify on each parcel because it's like if you have a little bit of experience with a spot, like so, for example, we'll take like the one piece of water access that I've hunted like this year in Pennsylvania, right? I've never hunted it before, but with some trail camera intel and some like old sign, I kind of knew what to expect for sign.
Yeah.
And then I got some visuals of some deer and like the caliber of deer, right? And the age class of deer. So I could quickly kind of understand it's like, okay, even if I'm not seeing big sign, it doesn't mean that there's not big deer here or that there's not a big deer in the area, because I knew that there were big deer just from the cameras. And if you were just going by what the sign was telling you, you wouldn't put those two together, And so I knew that even a small rub at the right spot meant that there was probably a good deer in the area.
Yeah.
Even though the sign wasn't big, but when you go into new places and you don't know like how to quantify the sign, it takes you a minute to try to figure it out, especially when you're in places like, we were in Northeast Missouri, like near the border of Iowa. Like you should be
big deer there.
Should be big deer, should be big sign, right? And we did find some big sign, and that's what we ended up hunting. And we ended up seeing, had an encounter, albeit a brief encounter. You can go to the Tethered YouTube channel and see the first videos up of that trip. But we saw two shooters like the second morning or whatever. I think it was the second morning or the first morning, actually. No, it was the second morning, second full morning. We found a really big rub and a scrape and some good stuff.
Yeah.
There ended up being, and I don't even think we mentioned this I don't know if I mentioned this on a previous podcast, and I don't think I mentioned it in the film, in the video. But the one guy that was giving us some intel that had hunted that spot before, he ended up missing like a 160 that I'm pretty sure we bumped to him because it came from where we were at in the morning because we got into these scrapes a little late.
Deer drive.
Yeah, it was wind bump, but I can't say for certain, but it was just kind of curious that like we bumped the deer that headed in that direction when we got to that scrape line. Now they weren't tended right then, like when we looked at the scrapes. So he obviously was probably coming into those scrapes to tend.
Yeah.
So we needed to probably be like another 20 minutes, 15 minutes earlier, and we probably been all right. But it was a 2-mile hike, and it was just hard to get in there early enough. Like we were 15 minutes late, and sure enough, like 30 minutes later, just a little north of us where that deer was headed. And it's the only way that deer could have went. Cause if he went, south of us, he would have ran into the river, or he would have had to like bang a right and cross, and we would have seen him, like would have seen whatever it was. And so he obviously went north, and then, the timing just kind of worked out, like, cause like a half hour later, 40 minutes later, he ended up missing like a 160 at 12 yards. So it was probably that deer. And it was probably the biggest deer that was on that particular piece, because the piece was not huge, and there were a couple different guys hunting it. And so we could kind of get a feel for like what was there and what wasn't there, which is why we pulled camp after like 2 days. Cause we felt like, all right, dude missed one, a big one. He's going to obviously be hunting that spot. He's not leaving, we're going to be relegated to like the B and C sections. And we've seen some decent deer, but there's a lot of pressure, and there's probably gonna be more pressure moving in as the week goes into November. So we should probably just get out of here. So that was, but you're right, man. It is tricky whenever you're hunting places that you just don't know a lot about.
And it's funny. I was just trying to think in my head. I've only ever whitetail hunted in one other state, and it was at my uncle's house, and he was like, go sit in the stand out back. They had some property.
Right.
Now I've turkey hunted in a ton of states, and it's the same thing. Like in Kansas, spend 45 minutes at a spot, and you can quickly go, let's hunt it, let's not hunt it, and move.
Right.
And that's what's exciting. Like when I watched your first video on YouTube, that's from the tethered hunt, I got jacked up when Chad was like, yeah, I think we need to go. And you're like, yeah, let's go. That gets me excited, because you're like, something new, more exploring, more putting time on the ground, looking for sign, because you just don't know what's going to be out there. And so I can equate it to turkey hunting, because I've done that for turkey hunting,
right?
Where you're like, this is a good spot, let's hang, or let's go bust a move.
Yeah.
And then typically when you get into something, you're like, this is why we moved, to find something, because you know what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the one bonus that we had on this trip, and I love Chad. Chad's my road dog. And, that was the first time Zach and I hung out together, and Zach's a baller, man. Like I love, like I'll hunt with that guy anytime. Like he's just a good dude, knows his stuff, great camera guy. And he's from Missouri. So it was helpful, because he has cool. Now he's never hunted like northern Missouri, where we were at. And so it was the first time for him being in that area. And like, just from his talking to him, and like when we were seeing stuff, like the deer were just way bigger than what he was used to, like body wise and whatever. Which is why we made the move to the second place we went to, because it's probably a little bit more familiar, and that episode will come out here at some point, but it was way more familiar terrain than what Chad, myself, and Zach were kind of used to, which is funny, because a couple of our buddies were like, when we said we were going to move and it was the terrain and topo that we were probably more familiar with, they were like, oh man, no. I want to see you like hunt somewhere where you've not familiar, right?
Yeah.
To just see you hunt something different. Or whatever. Because the second spot we went to was much more like ridge country, not super steep ridges, but some elevation changes, and like, river or creek bottoms and stuff like that. But the benefit that we had was that there was two of us, because Zach and I were always together, and Chad was always off on his own. So at least between the two of us, we could cover more ground and kind of get a good feel pretty quick for what was going on, as opposed to if you're completely by yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, because the first spot we were at, Zach and I basically spent all of our time in the north section, because we knew that one of the guys that was there had been hunting the south section, and I didn't want to go bust his hunt up. So I was like, well, I'll just go to this other spot. And then he left camp, and when Chad came in, Chad went to the south section and scouted all that. So we basically had the whole thing mapped at that point. Like we knew what was there, what wasn't there, between the scouting we all had done. And we were like, yeah, we need to bust a move and get out of here, which was helpful, because it wasn't just one point of view.
Yep.
We were able to kind of pull our information and make a collective decision on what needed to happen.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm excited to see your other videos. It's cool to see your trailer in use. I got to watch it in the process of being built, and I'm like,
yeah.
During your process, I'm like, is he actually going to use this thing? And then now it's like, hey, he's using it.
Yeah.
And it's cool.
Yeah. Well, I rode dirty from Missouri to Pennsylvania, because at one point, I don't remember if it was Zach or me or what. It was probably me. I don't remember. one of us, I know it wasn't Chad because he didn't move my truck. It was either me or Zach. One of us pulled the truck forward and the lights were still attached, like still plugged in. So when we dropped it, and I didn't recognize when it happened, you know, we just wrapped stuff up and we went to hunt. It was the last place that we were at. And when I went to leave, like they all left, you know, Chad was driving back home to Ohio because he had to take care of some business for a couple of days, and Zach was done. And so I stayed at that spot one more night. And then I was driving to the next state to meet Chad. And so I got and hooked everything up. And I'm like, why aren't my lights working? I'm like, I had no lights. Like I didn't have brake lights. I didn't have anything. But I didn't notice it until I was in like Illinois, I think. And I pulled over and it was starting to get like dusk out or whatever. And I was like, man, my brake lights or my lights should be on by now, you know? And I'm like, man, that's weird. So I like turned a turn signal on and they weren't on. I was like, well, turn signal, if it doesn't work, it's not a big deal. I like put the emergency brake on and went around to look at the brake lights. I'm like, man, there is not a light on this thing. Like nothing. So I slept in like a rest stop that night just so I wasn't driving at night because no one would be able to see me from behind, and got up at like daybreak the next morning and drove to like the next state. And then, you know, just I ended up fixing it when I got home. Like literally it severed the entire thing. So I had to like rewire the entire like wiring harness to get lights to work again. But
I was just hoping your heater didn't catch the thing on fire. And
I would be lying if I said I wasn't slightly concerned about that because there was that. And like the first morning after because the first night when everyone was there, like the first night I was there by myself before Chad and Zach got in, I didn't need the heat because it was warm. The first night they got into town, it was like 27 degrees that night. And so we had the heater on, right? And so I was like, one, I hope it doesn't catch on fire and like burn us all alive. And two, I was like, hope that carbon monoxide detector works. Yeah. Because that was like, it's going to be a real bummer if none of us wake up tomorrow, you know?
I have a van. This is a side thing. I have a van, old van and diesel van. I was on a road trip and I slept in a Cabela's parking lot. I had a Mr. Buddy's heater.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people having their box blinds or whatever. And I lit that thing up and I'm like, is this safe to like light in an enclosed area?
Negative.
I didn't have cell service, so I couldn't look it up. And I'm like, well, I'm a real hard sleeper. So I'm like, if I go to sleep and don't wake up,
never going to know.
I'll never know. So, so I went to sleep like peaceful, knowing like if I die, I just won't know it. And I just won't wake up. I did text my wife and I'm like, if you don't hear from me, I'm in the Cabela's parking lot at this location. I love you. Because it was free. It was like 14 degrees out. I'm like, I got to light this heater on. And I did wake up, if anyone was concerned.
Yeah. I did.
Surprise, I'm alive.
I did wake up at one point that night with like a gasp, like, because I was like, you know, I wanted to wake up at some point or, you know, at least like check to make sure like everything was cool or whatever, you know. And so after that, I was like, I was good to go. That, and I also realized that like that thing's not airtight enough. And anytime I run the heater too, it's like I leave the window open, you know, or at least cracked or whatever. Yeah. So should be good to go. Also that night, Chad woke up the next morning. He's like, man, my face is cold. And I'm like, hey, genius, probably because you left the door open by your head. Like you never shut the door, left it open. So that was, you know, why he was cold. Also probably why we didn't die. Maybe. Yeah. So
that's a good thing.
But man, let's flip the subject here. Let's stop talking about, you know, we can talk more about Missouri and that trip or whatever. But I want to hear about, you and I talked about this already. Like you killed a great buck in Pennsylvania, and then you also went and you hunted in another area in PA prior to that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your trip first, because you took a little trip, and this is a place that you and I've wanted to go check out just in general and haven't had a chance. We even talked about it this like off season because I was like, hey, I want to start heading to this specific area and start scouting. I was like, I feel like there's good deer there, and like it's, you know, rugged and it's all the stuff that I kind of like or whatever. It feels like it'd be ripe for good deer. Yeah. And you were like, season was rolling around. You're like, hey, guess what? I'm going to go to that general area, you know, to do some hunting this year, and I'll suss it out and let you know what I find. So like, talk to me a little bit about that trip. Yeah.
It was another one of those last minute things. I became friends with this dude pretty quickly, met him, and it was like, you hunt,
it was
I
love
hunt,
at first sight.
Let's be friends. And,
it's kind of how we met.
Yes. And, so he goes, hey, I'm going upstate. We live in the lower part of our state, so we call everything
north of us, upstate.
Even if it's 5 minutes, it's like, I'm going upstate.
And you're going to Doylestown.
Yeah. And he goes, "Hey, we're going up. You want to come with us?" And this guy and his two friends, they've been talking about getting into saddle hunting. So that's kind of how I met the other guys. They tried out my setup, and then they bought their setup, so they were all jacked up to go hunt on other saddles on public land. And so we went up. I hooked my camper up. I was like, well, I could bring my camper because it's going to be raining and cold. So we brought the camper and camped. It was awesome. It was a fun time in general, camping and whatnot. And it was my first time really whitetail hunting public land, big woods, mountains,
right,
or Pennsylvania hills or whatever you want to call them.
Well, no, I'd say where you're at, you definitely get into some mountains in that general area. I mean, for people that are listening, like where we live, it's like you'll get some mountain type stuff in a couple of the pieces of public that we've scouted and hunted in the past. Some of the stuff I was hunting this year around those cuts and stuff. But by and large, it's a lot of flat stuff, or very, very subtle, grade changes and stuff like that. Like you're not getting like, it's not hill country, ridge country, bluff, like you're looking for high spots. Yeah. And that's about it.
So we drive up and got up there super late, set up camp, woke up in the morning, it's pouring rain. So the guy said, well, he had his spot. Like he goes every year, he hunts and he sees deer or whatever. And wouldn't tell me where it was. And he was like, but you can hunt everything else. So we start driving around and piles of deer. I mean, on public land, which down here we just is not
it's
normal.
Not commonplace.
And so we see a bunch of deer, and the information from the locals is that the acorns were just shot. There was nothing, and everything that you would find was just totally rotted. And so a lot of everything was just down low, eating on grass, and people's, there's a lot of hunting camps up there. So in and around those hunting camps. And then we split up and it stopped raining, and I'm at this spot, and right on this open field, I see this big buck. I was like, there's a big buck standing right in the middle of this. Literally, like the parking lot is right there, 100 yards from the parking lot. There's a big buck, and there's like 15 does. So we let him go, and then I hunted there in the morning, and it was kind of like similar to down here. Drive around, you see a deer, and you figure out how to hunt it.
Right.
Hunted it that first morning, saw some does. I don't have a doe tag for that area, so I couldn't shoot any does. Otherwise, I would have shot a lot of does.
Right.
And then after that, I kind of got that out of my system. We just put our packs on and started walking. And I found it was cool to look at maps and say, let's look at this terrain feature. That was the first time I've really done that. And man, we a lot of mountain laurel, which I'm not used to, and clear cuts and select cuts, which I realize are two different things.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out the difference between what's a select cut, what's a clear cut, how old is it?
Yeah.
Which I've heard a lot of guys on your podcast talk a lot about. So it's cool to kind of hit that.
Dude, like to hear it and then actually visualize it and see it. Yeah.
And we walked for 3.5 miles, and there was not a sign of life. And it wasn't like we were going to go back to our car and keep going. We only had 3 days. And so we just kept walking and would kind of go, all right, this spot's a bust. Where are we going next? Let's just keep walking. And finally, for the first evening sit, we got on some really good sign. And then it started to get hotter and hotter and hotter. And the guy I was with had never done any public land hunting, only our area farm, go sit in my ladder stand that's been there for 30 years.
Right.
And so I was kind of helping him out. And so the first night we found some really, really, really good sign, and I had him set up on it, and then I left him. I'm like, you stay.
What were you starting to run into in terms of like, just in terms of
sign? There was in this area, they would do a big clear cut and fence it off. And so, which I'm walking in the dark.
It's like construction fencing?
Just like deer fencing.
Oh, with deer fencing?
Yeah.
Weird.
And so I'm walking in the dark. I'm like, run into a fence. I'm like, there's a fence like 4 miles back into this. And it's, 50-acre chunk of land that they fenced off so that it could grow up. And then they would take the fence down. Well, after we found that, we realized to look at the map, and you can tell on the map, there used to be a fence here.
Oh, wow.
And that area has grown up. And then we looked up to see how long they would keep the fences up for. to know, like, all right, this one, they
How
just
old
took
is
the
the
fence
cut or
down
whatever.
last year,
Yeah.
and it was beautiful habitat, like
Nice.
beautiful. So it had been pouring rain. It was really, really hard to see a scrape. Leaves were falling.
Right.
And even if there was a scrape in the morning, it was like leaves had covered it and had been soaked up.
Right.
And so I was just looking for rubs, any sort of rub. And there was a ton of we started to hit some kind of historical sign. And then I would drop a pin, and then we would kind of just start to slowly circle that historical sign, and then find some sign that was like 2 weeks old. And then we would start to get into sign that's like, all right, there's still bark chips on the ground.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And when I say rain, like it was pouring rain. We were
Yeah.
soaked. And so I found the biggest, we talk about big rubs. I found the biggest rub I've ever found in my life.
Really?
Yeah. I think I sent you a picture of it.
I don't think you did. Oh, no. Wait, I think you did, yeah.
But all the sign was between the old select cuts, which you could see for 200 yards through.
Right.
And it was just about 2 foot tall mountain laurel. And then there would be a logging trail, and then it would be a clear cut. And these clear cuts were so thick that you could find the one deer trail into these clear cuts. So like there wasn't like trails coming in and out. There was like a entrance and a exit.
Right.
And then maybe a side trail that was used by tiny deer. I don't know.
Right.
Or raccoons.
Right.
And so we would find that deer trail into those clear cuts. They were impassable. I couldn't walk through them. And we would hit this group where there would be 15 rubs within the span of 25 yards.
Right.
And then just try to figure out what are our thermals doing and where's the trail.
Mm-hmm.
And so that first evening sit was awesome because it was my first real sit on public big woods, and I probably could have killed 5 or 6 does, which was awesome, and I had a small buck that wasn't legal because you have to be 3 on each side.
Right.
And the guy I was with saw a few does, and the other guys that were hunting the exact same way we were covered up in bucks. And I ran into a trail camera, about 100 million of those reflective pins.
Right.
Which I didn't see until my way out.
Right.
So that first night, we're on our way out, and I was like, someone else is hunting in here.
Right.
We were so far back. I'm like, this is awesome. Untouched, maybe. I couldn't see any human sign. So we just totally abandoned.
Who knows how old those pins are, too. It's
yeah.
Like it could have
well,
been
these ones, look,
forever.
they weren't rusty at all.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So those are relatively new then?
Yeah.
It may be not from this year. It may be from like the past 2 years or something like that. But yeah.
And that guy who I was with, we set up at like 2:00. And at about 3:15, he looks to his left, and there's a guy with a climber. Now we're way back in there, and this guy he waves at him, and the guy with the climber stops and hangs his head and turns around and starts walking back the other way. He walked a long ways to get in there.
Right.
And that was the only deer sign, so I don't know where that guy went from there. Second night, same thing. We were looking for hard transitions because those old clear cuts were so thick. We were trying to find the hardest type of transition where a buck could come out of his bed and instantly see what's going on. The thermals in our area were so funky because it was the mountains, but because it'd been logged and clear cut, like these logging roads would come through and actually would create the logging
Vacuum.
road would create a vacuum.
Yeah. It's funny because like I've talked to Dan about that before. Like we probably talked about it during our series. I know we talked about it on the session he and I did together when we talked specifically about wind and thermals. There's almost like this backdraft that happens, like whenever you're sitting like in an open area up against timber or whatever, because that wind comes ripping through, then it hits an object and it has to do something when it hits an object, and so it kind of rolls back on itself. And creates So those are kind of kind of funky. I thought I had one of those. I had something very similar happen this year, and I don't remember where I was hunting for it to do that. But anyway, I'll think of it.
But so we had 3 nights to hunt, and on our third night, every sit we had deer around. It was just buck sign was good. We just weren't seeing
the right ones.
Found a new area, logging road. So just for purposes, to the north of me, I'm in my saddle, trees in front of me, and then on the other side of my tree, on the north side, is this clear cut. It's a steep hill, and the wind is coming out of the north. It was great. So I'm sitting on the opposite, the south side of the logging road. I have a clear cut behind me with a deer trail coming out of the laurel into the clear cut and the logging road in front of me. So I got does crossing, and every doe that walked by was like looking straight up at me. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Because the wind is in my face, and it was a stiff wind. And I started dropping milkweed, and it was like the wind was coming off the hill, hitting the logging road, which created this like vacuum and sucked my wind right back up the hillside. And so I'm like, I didn't have any other option. It was our last night. I couldn't move because I had about an hour and a half left. I'm like, I can get down and just keep walking. But the sign was so good and the rut was starting to pick up. I'm like, I'm going to catch something coming across was my hope, which I eventually did. A buck came from my left and came directly behind me. The wind stopped. And I hear this, psh, psh, and I look behind and I just see antlers. He was outside of his ears. And since I don't have any cameras or anything up there, I was like, I'm going to shoot a good, just the first.
Whatever gets you excited.
The first good buck that gets me excited. And all I could see was he was outside his ears, and I'm like, that's all I need. And I'm shooting him. And so I get turned around because he's behind me, and the wind stopped. And I'm like, this is perfect. My thermal is actually sucking against the hill, and he's not going to smell me. Well, the wind stopped.
Of course
literally,
it did.
my wind just goes right to him. And I ranged him. And as soon as I put my rangefinder on my pouch, he was like, choo, gone. I was like, you got to be kidding me. It was cool to experience it and try to get around and work the thermals. But I think in total we all saw good bucks. And that same night, we're about 4.5 miles from our truck at this point. The other group of dudes is a little over 2.5 miles from their truck. And I get a text that says buck down. And I was like, sweet. And they were hunting. There was these kind of mining holes that were about 50 yards wide by about 100 yards long. And they were about 12 feet deep. And every little hole, pocket hole, was filled with sign. There was buck beds and rubs and scrapes in every one. Because I got to go, when I helped them drag their deer out, I got to look at it. And we're standing in these bowls, and the thermal from every side was sucking into those bowls. So a buck could bed in that bowl, and any doe or anything that walks within however
100 yards, 200 yards, whatever it is, yeah,
he can smell. And so, but it was like a staging bedding area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got in there super early, and the one guy drew on 2 different bucks. This guy drew on a buck, and then, they're cut busted or whatever, and then he ends up shooting this buck. It was fun, drag him 2.5 miles out in the dark.
How was it? Was it good deer?
Yeah. Pennsylvania has this typical mountain deer stereotype that guys are like, oh, it's good for the mountains. But he was like 115-inch, nice. 3.5-year-old. It was a great deer,
nice.
Whether it was down here or up there.
Right, yeah. I mean, you get into some of those mountain areas like that. It's like, even on this side of the state, it's like, and that was my kind of theory. It's why I started looking at it, because I was like, around here, to find a good deer with like good age on it that has potential is hard, you know. And I shared I share trail camera pictures with you all the time, but I had 2 deer on camera this year that were probably 4.5 years old, and the one was a hammer, and I probably had like 2 that were 3.5 that were good deer, and that was the one one of the ones that was 3.5 is the one I had the encounter with that I screwed up whatever it was 2 weeks ago. But there was one that was like over 140, really good deer. And you can find those now and then here, but like, you and I've talked about this in this general area. It's like, you'll have one year where it's like, this year I had, 2 deer that were really good. One of them vanished, and I never caught up to him, so I have no clue where he went. And then I had that big deer, and then I had probably 2 other 3-year-olds that were like right around Pope and Young. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That were good deer for the area. Next year I could have 0.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I could have just nothing on camera, and maybe get lucky and catch something cruising on the rut, but nothing that I could like know what the opportunity is. Right.
Yeah.
And when you go to places like that where you were at, you just have so much more ground you can cover, right? Because around here, it's like, it's smaller chunks, and you're limited in how much you can move and stuff like that. And you go up to places like that, and it starts to really mimic more how I hunt whenever I go to the Midwest, where it's like, I can literally go out and hunt the opportunity down.
Yeah.
Right. And it would be different too, because what I want to do this year when we go to scout this late winter, early spring, or even go up and, bear hunt or whatever, is I want to take trail cameras and put out trail cameras and just let them.
Yeah.
And let them sit for like a year. You know what I mean? And then go back and check them and then start to have an idea of what's around, because those deer up there will have a better opportunity to make it from one year to the next.
Yeah.
Just because the vast nature of the space and the hunting numbers, hunter numbers in the general area.
Yeah.
Big hunting heritage up there, but huge tracts of land and not nearly as much population density.
Yep. And gun hunting heritage.
Yeah.
So like
bow hunting, you're probably pretty clean for the most part.
Yeah. And this is a shout out to last night. I got up in this, we found a good sign. I was blowing by sign that if it was down here, I would never blow by, because I would get to it. I would go, man, I just walked blah, 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 blah. And there was no sign. Find really, really fresh sign and realize like there's probably something just a little further.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a cool experience. Like kind of make a mental note. Here's the first good sign I saw, that if I was down here in my small plot areas, man, I would hunt that.
Yeah.
Like crazy.
Yeah.
But I got my last night where that buck came in. I got up halfway into the tree. I realized this tree is deader than dead. And I'm like, I can't be in this tree because it was windy.
Yeah.
And so I get down and there's a tree about 5 feet to the left. I start getting up to that tree. But by this point, my ropes for my sticks have been all tangled up. Everything it took me way too long to get in this tree. I'm really struggling. I look like a goober, I'm sure. I get up into the tree. I start looking around, and there's a trail camera like 10 feet from me. And so if there's a dude on here listening, and he's got a guy going up and down a tree like 5 times, because I dropped my backpack. It was a mess. That was me. I'm not normally that disheveled. But whoever that guy was did his homework. I mean, he was I'm talking way back in there.
Yeah.
On the sign, in a great spot, hard transition. And it's just, it was hard to get on deer up there because of how open the one side was and how thick your cover was on the other side.
Yeah.
And so I think if we would have had maybe 2 or 3 more days, we didn't find that really, really, really good sign till that last day.
Right.
And that was when that buck blew me from behind. So it would have been fun to spend some more time there, but I'm excited to go back up there because by the time I got up there, I think that was like our 12th mile for the day. I was wiped. I was toast. Right. And so I'm excited to get back up there with fresh feet. And
yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it because it's just, I know I've looked at it on the map. I've e-scouted it and kind of looked at it and was like, yeah, this is a place I think I need to spend some time where I think there could have some opportunities to probably run into some really good deer. I kind of equated it to, I don't think it's exactly, but like I look at it and I'm like, the Alleghenies, like when you get out, like in the Pittsburgh area, out toward Pittsburgh or whatever in the western part of the state, rugged country, big mountains, or big mountains, for the East Coast, and great deer, like good age structure, find some really high caliber deer, whether they're big or not. I mean, Litzinger killed a great deer there this year. Bo has been on multiple big deer there this year. And so when I started looking, like that was really what it was. Cause I was like, man, I'd love to go hunt the Alleghenies. And at some point I will.
Yep.
I was like, but it's just too far for me to go to hunt consistently. Right. It's like, I need to make that like a thing, kind of like Greg does, where it's like, I need to go out with like him and Johnny Stewart or whatever and go hunt it a couple years in a row and try to, that way the third year, maybe I finally get on the,
don't go hunt with me.
Well, dude, yeah, you can of course always go,
but I came home and then 2 days later killed a buck down here.
Yeah. So. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But I like to go to the Midwest and hunt too much to like invest that time in Pennsylvania right now. It's like at some point I will. That's why I was looking at this because like, it's closer to home. I've got the travel trailer now, so I can literally work from it. So I could go up on a Wednesday, hunt the mornings and evenings, like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then hunt Saturday, and be able to put some like real time in there to try to hunt it and figure it out. You know? So that's why. And I feel like the terrain is right and somewhat similar enough to the Alleghenies to where it's like you can start to probably find similar types of pockets and similar types of deer. That's was kind of what my thinking was. But so rub it in, why don't you? You came home, and of course killed a buck. I got that text message, which was awesome. But like, dude, you got to tell the story for this because this was like, I told it. So I got off the phone with you, right? And I think I was in Missouri still, maybe. I was on the trip, wherever I was at, whatever state I was in. And I get off the phone with you and I look at Chad and I was like, yeah, Wilson just killed a good buck. He's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, Pennsylvania? I'm like, yeah. I was like, dude, and it's a classic Wilson story. I was like, because like the dude just does like nothing normal happens. I was like, it's not like, hey, I arrowed him. He went 30 yards and I found him. It was like no big deal. I was like, it's always an adventure with Wilson. And so I told him the story. And he's like, you gotta be freaking kidding me. So you need to tell this story, dude, because it's like, it's nearly unbelievable.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have believed it. Like I had people there with me that was like, they're like, I can't believe that just happened. It's one of my spots that's it holds does and bucks cruise there. All summer, there'll be bucks there all summer. They peace out. And then during the rut, there's this one little funnel that they cruise through. And there's been a buck there the last couple of years. He never leaves. He never leaves this, I don't know, probably let's say 400 acres of property. And now there's big housing development on one side. Then there's kind of a farm that nobody hunts besides one guy. And if you step foot on there, he'll try to shoot you or something.
Right.
Terrifies me. But it's kind of one of those spots that if you blow it up, the deer are gone.
Right.
And so I hunted it once. And then I hunted it a couple weeks later with a good wind because it's a really weird wind that you need. And the wind shifted, so I left. But I knew I'd gotten pictures of this buck in the summer that didn't get any bigger from last year. And I'm like, this deer's got to be 5.5 years old. And so, I don't know. I'm not the best at aging deer. He's an old deer.
But you've seen him for multiple years.
Yep.
And so it's like
he's got a big scar on his shoulder. He's very recognizable.
Right.
And
what, you've had 3 years of history with him.
Yep.
And he was decent the first year.
Yeah.
So he wasn't a year old. He was probably a 2-year-old, right? So.
And then this year he didn't get any length, but gained a lot of mass, and his body was massive. I'm like,
it was a big bodied deer, dude.
I'm like, I want to shoot this deer. I'm like, he gets me really excited. But I got 3 pictures of him this summer, never another single picture of him. And I'd been hunting a different deer that I wanted to lay eyes on before I shot, and because he's a big antler deer, but he's not old at all. And so I was like, I'm gonna go hunt this deer. Get in my tree. I'm hunting. The wind is perfect. There's does everywhere. Does on the property next to me. I can see him eating grass, and I'm like, this is gonna be an awesome night. Well, then towards the end of the evening, I had a 7-point come by, whatever. It was a great night of hunting. You know, there's rut activity, couple small bucks chasing.
Yeah, it was good action. Like you're just enjoying yourself. Yeah.
Kind of one of those nights where you get out of the tree and you're like, that was a fun hunt. Then my wind switched. Like literally it was like, whoop. And I was like, oh no. And this little property's got a cornfield in it, and then it's got a big hay field. And that's pretty much it. So I'm like, I got to get out of here because I cannot blow this up. Like, can't blow these does out of here. I can't blow this up. So I got out of the tree, walked to the edge of the corn. I had probably 20 minutes of light left. Looked in the hayfield. There's no deer. So I'm like, great. I'm going to bounce out of here and get to my truck. I take about 10 steps into the hayfield, and I'm walking right through where deer are going to cross. And I hear shh, shh. And I was like, oh, that's not good. Because it's really like you can't blow these deer up. I look to my right, and here's the buck walking straight at me. And it's light out. I'm standing in the middle of a hayfield. I got my backpack on. I got my sticks on I got everything. I look like a Sherpa. Right. I got my ozonics thing over my shoulder. And I was like, oh my goodness, he's literally walking right at me. Came through the hedgerow, starts walking straight at me. I like head down, I knock an arrow, and now I'm like half hunched over thinking I can hide in like a cut hayfield. There's nothing. Yeah. And I'm like, I feel like an idiot. And then he turns and starts walking parallel in front of me, and there's this big patch of weeds that the farmer just didn't cut. I don't know. And he goes behind it. I range it. It's 30 yards. And I'm shooting a single pin. I took 5 steps. I don't know why I thought it would be. I'm like, let me just try to get to 25 yards. Which, looking back, probably wasn't a smart thing because 30 yards is fine. I took 5, I was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and stopped, and he didn't move. And he was looking right at me. I could see him through the weeds. And I don't think he knew what I was, and just put his head back down. and stepped out
I mean,
behind the weeds.
if there's so many does out there that time of year, though,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like if there's just so many does, like that's the one thing around here. If you are hunting some of these, like either really small parcels or like private permission small parcels or whatever it is, you know, there's usually so much deer activity because they all get pushed into like these little spots,
Yep.
right? And so they're used to like just, at least my opinion is, right, they're used to a lot of like deer motion,
Sounds.
right? And they're used to like people sounds.
Yep.
And you know, not saying that they won't blow out, but the right deer will be more tolerant.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And
I was, you know, I look back and I'm like, I was standing in a shadow, like, because the sun was setting. And so, like, I was in a big shadow and everything else was still lit up. And I drew. And as soon as he caught my wind is when I stopped him. So I knew he was going to catch, my wind was blowing right at him. That's why I was trying to get out of there. He caught my wind. I stopped him at the same time and buried my arrow right through him. And as soon as I released, you know, when you have a shot and you're like, that was sweet. You know, shot breaks.
Yep.
Everything was good. You know, nothing, everything was perfect. And I just heard, like it sounded like I shot a tree.
Right.
And I was like, are you kidding me? Well, when I stopped him, he put his left leg back, pushing his shoulder backwards. And I just caught the edge of his shoulder blade. And I just watched him tuck tail and run with my pink Luminoc just bouncing
Flapping
through the air.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I got like 3 inches of penetration. This is what it looked like. And my heart sank. I was shaking so bad I fell to my knees. I called my wife. She didn't answer. I called my other buddy and I'm like, dude, I shot a buck, but I don't think I got very much penetration. And he ran towards the property we can't go on. Game Commission can't get us on. Cops can't get us on. We can't get there. So I wait 30, 40 minutes. I walk to my truck and he had bedded about 10 feet from my truck, like 5 feet off the road. There's a tiny little hedgerow. He jumps up, runs down the road.
Do you still have your arrow in him?
No.
Okay.
So as I was walking back, I find my arrow and there's about 2 inches broken off. Like the broadhead and 2 inches of my carbon are gone. So I'm like, well, I had to get past the shoulder blade for that to break off. And there's good blood on my arrow. Like it was spraying. So I'm like, oh, that's a good sign. But when I jumped him, I can literally hear him running on the pavement. It's like down the street. And I was like, what in the world? I had just met a neighbor who had just moved in. I'm like, well, I'm going to go talk to him because he kind of ran towards that property. And he was like, if you shoot a buck, let me know. I'd love to help you find it. I talked to him for about an hour. My buddy shows up and we were like, well, let's just go back, impact, start looking for blood. And we're walking down the road. I'm in camo, which if I shoot a deer, I typically take my camo off and try to look like a normal person.
Right.
And I'm walking down the road in my camo, which saved me because here comes this diesel truck just going like 5 miles an hour. I'm like, what's this guy doing? He stops, rolls his window down. He's like 25, 26 years old with his buddy and his girlfriend. He's like, do you shoot a buck? You know, real redneck. Like,
right.
And I'm like, yes. A lot of people hunt in this area.
Yep.
He's like, how big? And now I'm like, why is this dude asking me this? And I said, well, he's good. He's a good size. I'm not going to tell him he's real big. I said, well, he's a good size. And he goes, oh, cool. He's in the bed of my truck. I look at him. I'm like, dude, don't be messing with my emotions right now.
Right.
Because we all know the feeling of waiting to go find a deer.
Hitting one or thinking it's going to get away or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
And he goes, no, really. I look back there and there's my deer I just shot in the back of his truck. I look back at him. I'm like, what? And he gets out of his truck. I look there again. I'm like, that's the deer. He's like, that it? I'm like, yeah, I can show you trail cam pictures. I can show you everything. And I gave this dude, I mean, it was Corona or whatever. I gave this guy the biggest hug. Right. I lifted him off the ground. He's like, I don't even know you. I'm like, I don't care. And drops it off in my truck. So like I literally shoot this deer, go through all the emotions of like, okay, I made a good shot, but I hit the shoulder, which is no good. So hopefully I find him, to waiting an hour, to having the buck dropped at my truck.
That's crazy, man. So where did he find him?
So he went about 350 yards down the road and literally took a nosedive into the ditch in front of his farm. And so he had been hunting that evening. He comes home, and the buck must have fallen as soon as he was coming into his into his driveway, because he said it was still alive.
Mm.
So he drove to his house, which is just down the driveway, grabbed a weapon
Mm-hmm.
to come put the deer down. And when he gets there, it was dead. And then the neighbor came out and was like, "What are you going to do with this buck? You want to just throw it in the woods behind my house?" And he goes, "No, this is too good of a deer. We got to go find the guy."
Right. Someone's gonna be looking for
Yeah.
him.
So he puts it in his truck, and he remembered seeing my truck parked on the edge of a field, and was like, "I'll just go see if that guy shot it." And that was the first guy he talked to. And it's rare to find that, like
Right.
someone who's going to go out of their way to pick this deer. I was blown away.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a good dude right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I call my wife, and she's like, "Have you found blood?" And I'm like, "No, I found my deer." "How'd you find it?" I'm like, "Guy dropped it off for me." She's like, "What?" I tell her, I'm like, "He found it, brought it to me." And it was just amazing that I had been walking on the road at the same time that he was coming up the road.
Yeah. I mean, it was kismet, right? It was meant to be, man. I mean, one, it's like kudos to that guy for doing the cool thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, plenty of people probably would just like put it in the truck, hung it up,
Yeah.
not put a tag on it or anything, been like,
Yep.
"Oh, finders keepers."
Cut the head off.
Yep. And just like been like, "All right, got a freezer full now." Like,
Yeah.
So, good on that guy for doing the right thing and at least going out and making an attempt of trying to find the person if he could
Yep.
or whatever. Because I mean, truthfully, it's like he was risking getting in trouble. To be honest with you, it's
No
like
tag on a buck. It's
Right.
not gutted. It's in the night. Like, it's kind of sketchy.
kind of sketch.
You can get in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, if a game commission or a cop would have pulled up or something like that and been like, "What are you up to?" or whatever, it's like, try explaining that. I'm just
Yep.
trying to be a good dude. I found this buck in the ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did, buddy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And so I did go back to my shot, found where my arrow was laying, found blood, tracked blood to the bed next to my truck, blood on the road. I drove down the road, and because my buddy was like, "You shoot us your deer?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so I went back and followed
Backtracked
blood.
and followed everything. Yeah.
So I would have, the nice thing is I would have found him.
Mm-hmm.
But if he had picked it up and I had missed him, I would have followed a blood trail to no deer.
Right.
And so I'm very, very thankful he did it. I'm just very thankful that he found me.
Right. And then it worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then, if you walk there and you're like, "All right, the blood ends here.
Yep.
Where do I go from here?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, man. I mean, that was what I told Chad. I was like, "Dude, only Wilson would the guy down the street
Yeah.
pick the buck up out of a ditch and go find him
Yep.
and give him his deer."
Yeah.
I was like, I would have never found that deer.
Yeah.
I was like, would have never happened. I was like,
So I ended up, when I got him open and everything, so my arrow, because he ran for probably 50 yards with my arrow in him. I got that first lung and shredded it.
okay.
Because like my arrow went through the shoulder blade into that first lung. And then because he ran with it before it came out, my prod head was just in there, just up
Dicing it
and down
up.
all over. And so I'm surprised he made it out of his first bed.
Right. Well, if you didn't bump him, he was probably going to die there
Yeah.
shortly. Because I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like he ran far. It sounded like he lived like another.
Yeah, 45 seconds maybe.
Yeah, after that. Yeah,
And
exactly.
the weird thing is I never park there. Like I never park my truck at this part of the property, but I had kind of gotten a little late. I usually park at the house. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just park up here on the edge of this road because I don't like my truck on the side of the road.
Right.
And so it was just a weird that I parked my truck there, which helped this guy find me. So it just all worked out.
Yeah,
it was
like
just
everything
all-
that had to happen,
Yeah.
ended up happening, which is crazy, man.
But it was cool. It was the first buck that like my son, who's 5, he'll remember this one.
Mhm.
Because like my wife, it was bedtime, but she's like, bringing the kids over, and it's like 35 minutes away. So
Right.
she brings the kids down. They help me gut it. That he didn't gut it for me. That was the only thing.
Right.
I was like, come on, dude.
Come on, dude. If you're gonna pick up my buck for me, it's like at least
you didn't
gut it.
cape him out for me. No, so they helped Braxton, my son, helped me gut it, which was sweet, and got pictures with him, and like he'll remember that. It was cool.
It'll be the first one he remembers helping dad
Yep.
with his buck.
And then the neighbor who I'd talked to when he came to see the buck, he pulls his phone out. He's got 1,000 trail cam pictures of him.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and so
Nice.
he which I just never knew because this property that just sold, they were like no hunting, very anti-hunting. So I had no information about this property that was just across the street. Turns out every single picture of this buck all summer was at his property.
Right.
And then, but I just knew like this funnel, he had no does. I'm 200 yards away with every doe.
Right.
And this one little funnel every single year, I'll get 4 or 5 days worth of one buck and then I'll never see him again.
Right.
And I'm like, the first week in November, we got that big cold front. And then, we got that heat.
Heat right after, yeah.
It was the last day. So I'm looking at the weather and I'm like, this is the week I want to hunt. This is the last night with cold weather before it gets high temps.
Yeah.
And that was the most deer activity I saw all year.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, dude. It was a great buck too, man. Big body.
Yeah.
Awesome deer. And that was your biggest one to date, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Biggest weight. And I don't have official antler score on him yet, but he's just the inside measurement was the widest deer I've ever shot. And his mass is bigger than any deer I've shot. So he will score. I know a lot of people are in or not into score, but he'll score, I think, in the high 120s, which is
it's a great deer for around here, man. Yeah, for sure.
Only hunt urban
areas.
And I have a few farms that I hunt, but it was small parcel, it's just awesome. Yeah, it was super fun. I was like jazzed. So the next day I'm like, I got to go out. I got all these doe tags to fill. I'm like, I'm going to get right. Usually people shoot in our area, you shoot your buck and people are like, pressure's off, don't have to hunt anymore. I'm like, dude, I'm going to go shoot some does, man. So I go out the next day to my other property where this other buck I'd been hunting real hard had been showing up. I'm pulling down the driveway and he's standing where did I text you this?
No.
He's standing in my parking spot.
That's awesome.
Missing half of his antlers.
Oh, really?
I thought I told you this.
No.
So he's a super young deer, but he's really cool because he's a mainframe 10 and off his G2, he's got like a 3-inch flyer, which for our area is awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. And
I'm like, I want to shoot this deer. I saw him a bunch of times under 30 yards, but the property lines are so funky, I couldn't shoot him. There's an abandoned house, which most people are like, dude, no one lives there. It's fine. I just was not comfortable shooting over a property line that I don't have permission. I have no way to get permission because I don't know how to get in contact with this owner. Could have shot him a couple times. I pull in, he's missing half his antlers. And now he's totally living, like he locked onto a doe and now has not left this property. And so I'm hoping that this week and next week gun season are good to him and he doesn't get whacked.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because he's a really, really good deer. So this is the first year, like, I got a really good deer for next. I've always had deer that I'm like, let's shoot him next year. Let's whatever.
Right.
This year, I'm already really excited for next year.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of been my hope for that deer. And now I still have my buck tag. So, I've not given up at this point yet. I still have some hunts in me. We're going to take that trip, do that, whether it's during late season or whether it's during, we end up going to hunt bears or something like that.
You could get a New Jersey tag.
Like, dude, I need to fill like the ones I have. It's like, okay, like, what am I doing? Just making like a collage of unfilled tags over here.
Yeah, you put it on your wall.
Yeah, so I've not given up hope yet, but there's part of me that like, I don't know that big deer that I had on camera. Like he's really been a phantom since probably I should have taken the 30th and the 31st off before I left from Missouri because he was super active those 2 days. And now I have like intel, and it's the first year I hunted this property. And so I kind of now know like when things start to flip on in that general area. And it's not a surprise, right? It's the same time that like a lot of places flip on. But there are properties that turn on differently at different times, right?
Yep.
And it was very clear that like that big deer was very active those last 2 days of October. Middle October, very late October. And then after that, he's nocturnal. I only really saw him moving on this property at night. And then basically since like the 3rd, like he's just been gone, disappeared. Haven't seen him since. So I don't know if he's been killed or what. I'm hoping I get like a rant. I'm to the point now with him where it's like, I don't really care if I kill him this year or not.
Yeah.
But I want just a picture of proof of life that he's still around. So I know, because next year it's like, I kind of know what needs to happen with that specific deer, at least. But I think this general area will play out consistently year over year.
Yeah.
I say that.
Well, the fact that you could get in there this year and be on a deer like that.
Yeah.
says a lot for that area.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I was a day late on him, or a day early on him, two different times. I mean, we got a couple Sundays here in Pennsylvania to hunt, but there were 2 different Saturdays that I hunted that I had the right wind on Sunday that I would have hunted him again if I were, legally allowed to hunt. And he showed up both of those Sundays in daylight.
Mm-hmm. And it's not
at 14 yards.
Yep. And it's not we see, on social media, guys post a picture of a buck in front of their stand.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, should have been hunting today. In your case, it's a lot of those guys don't see those bucks because they're bumping them or blowing them out, getting to that stand.
Yeah.
You kind of have this foolproof thing going on that you're not bumping him. So if you see a picture of him, you would have seen him if you were there.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. In theory. I mean, there is like one trail that basically comes up from where I kind of access that I do cross it. It's the only one that I cross. But what I've noticed is how they're kind of, at least the trail camera pictures that I've gotten, like they're only coming from that general area at night.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'll put it this way. It's like, I don't believe you ever go into anywhere necessarily. And I'm sure there's someone out there that probably proved me wrong with data, or Don Higgins might feel differently about it or whatever. But like, at least on public land, I'll put it that way. Like, I don't feel like there's anywhere you can access that you're not impacting deer that they don't know, that they have zero clue you've ever been there. Like, I just don't believe that that's true.
Yeah.
I think you're just trying to leave as little impact as possible and have as little disturbance as possible. That way they may not recognize you've been there until you've maybe hunted it 2 or 3 times, and then they've recognized that you're there. Right.
Yeah.
Because there's clearly a deer trail that kind of goes down. So like where I'm accessing through the water, that's how they're kind of getting down, whether they're getting a drink or whatever. Because I found rubs actually where I park my kayak. Like, I kayak in, there's rubs right there. And I was like, but it's really the only way I have to get in to that spot. And so I'm like, when are they using this? I don't know. Do I feel like I'm damaging anything?
Well, wasn't it opening day that you were in there? That
in the northern part of this piece.
And there was, it's a different part where that guy was rattling and grunting like a orchestra quartet or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it was September. It was September 19th, and like you would have thought he was in like Texas.
Yeah, at a high fence.
In Texas, in like October 31st, just getting after it with grunts and rattles.
I was excited because you were going in pumped, and you texted me, and I was like,
"Yeah." I mean, well, the funny thing was like one of the deer that I had in the spot, that great kind of like pre-rut spot around that scrape. Like, I had him in that northern part of the property.
Yeah,
and I think he was one of the. I feel pretty strongly he was one of that group of deer that I bumped that had that really big deer in it.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling like it was because what I had seen whenever I had glassed was that one deer that, I've thrown out, like he was probably like pushing 160, right?
Yep.
That was the side, which is it's a giant deer anywhere, but that's a really giant deer for around here.
Yeah, huge.
And then I saw another one that was an 8-point with him that was like pushing 140 and over. And I feel like that's the deer that I was on.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was yet another younger one. I say younger one, he was probably 3.5-year-old. That was like probably like a 130, 8-point or whatever. And I had him on that north camera. And I also, that's the one I ended up having the encounter with was that one that I blew that screwed the pooch on, 2 weeks ago or whatever. And so, and it's funny because they dispersed and they disappeared because I had them as a bachelor group early in the, like, I don't even know what it was before they were fully. I want to say it was probably like late July, and you could just tell like a few of their characteristics. And so now when I go back and look, I'm like, oh, that's that deer. That's that deer. That's that deer. They all disperse, but they all end up spending time there during rut.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So, I'm hopeful that like not all of them get killed, and at least I'll have like one of them that ends up coming back that ends up being the boss, because it seemed like that one was the boss, and he was the one who was like. Whenever he was around hitting that scrape, there wasn't another one of those deer on camera typically.
Yep.
And it wasn't until like he would be gone for a couple of days, a couple of the other ones would start to kind of sneak back.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to get into this, or if it's going to be a tangent, or maybe I'll just delete it and it'll never have happened. But I just want to have a shout out or just a plug a little bit, because I switched a bunch of archery stuff up this year.
Mm-hmm. As did I.
And this is I've shot 10 deer this year with my bow. People are like, oh my gosh, that's too many deer. Again, we have overpopulated urban areas where we can kill a lot of does. And I switched a lot of stuff up. I got a new bow. I changed from a 5-pin to a single pin, double or 2-pin slider. I changed my release. And looking back at shooting my buck, I don't even remember drawing my bow, anchoring, and settling my pin. I think because I spent so much time, because I switched my setup, getting to know it, making sure everything was dialed in, that I never drew and had a question on my shot. And I just want to make a plug, like, it's okay to switch your gear. I hear a lot of guys say, like, and I like the term, if it's broke, don't fix it. Because my old setup...
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
There it is.
There you go.
Well, I'm like, if it's broken, just duct tape it.
Yeah.
If it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, you might get I got an itch to change my setup up. And I changed... Everything was working fine. I changed it. But it's been so awesome this year, but only because I spent so much time getting to know my setup.
Right.
And now I'm working at an archery shop.
Well, I was just going to say, you work at an archery shop now, right?
Yeah.
It's like you've learned a ton, like you tune bows, you set bows up and stuff like that. It's Bob and AJ's is the shop that you work at. Great dudes. It's where I got my bow from. Solid guys, know their stuff. And I'm just making the plug because I like the guys. Like, I bought my bow, they didn't give me anything. So it's like, they don't pay me to say this or whatever. It's like, but I didn't change everything. I changed my bow because I was having a hard time getting the one that I was shooting to tune.
And you switched your release this year?
No, I have shot a back tension for the past 2 years.
Oh,
yeah,
got it.
Yeah, so that,
forget I said that.
Yeah, so that didn't change.
But we see it a lot. We see it all the time. I mean, we get guys that come into the shop. The season opens the next day, and they're like, "I want to get a new string on my bow." I'm like, "All right, cool." And they're like, "And I want to get a new sight." I'm like, "Do you want to hunt this week?"
Right.
Like, are you planning on trying to shoot a deer? Well, yeah. I'm like, all right, let's get into it, you know?
Right.
And so I think it's cool to change your setup. It's awesome. Yeah. Try new stuff. But just make sure you know how it works.
Yeah. Make sure you have time to spend with it. You know,
and I have loved my double pin on a slider.
Do you really?
I absolutely love it because I know that from 35 and under, I don't have to change anything. And if there's some reason I want to shoot anything further than 35, which I've shot a few deer further this year, you have time to move your sight.
Well, when they're that far out, usually it's like you can make some adjustments. One thing that helped me a ton, and you wouldn't know it, you know, based on my the outcomes this year in Missouri.
Your perils.
Yeah, my perils. Yeah. But, you know, I won't go as far as to say I was struggling, but yeah, I had some probably questions or doubts with like precise pin placement based on, you know, changing my bow and stuff like that, because I kind of knew what my previous bow would do, and I knew how to hold off or where to hold if I was over, you know, 25 yards or if I was under 25 yards or whatever the case was. And I had Brian Broderick on, my buddy from Day 6 gear, right? I shoot his broadheads and his arrows. And he kind of and he went through, and if you've not listened to that podcast, go back and listen to it because he'll explain it better than I will right now. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it. But his whole approach on a whitetail setup is to remove anything that could possibly go wrong and remove all the guesswork out of taking your shot.
Yep.
The point being is that things happen so quickly in the whitetail woods, especially if you're like a normal dude and you're probably taking your time off during rut to go hunt the rut. You know, I had encounters with shooter deer multiple times on this trip.
Yeah.
And there was only twice in that trip where I actually had one that was like walking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That like I had time to watch what he was going to do. You know what I mean? And kind of like anticipate. Everything else was like they were moving and you had to be on it, you know?
Yeah.
And what he does is a couple things. Like one, he doesn't use a drop away rest to hunt whitetails. He's like, the way he explains it is he's like, look, when guys shoot bows for money, target shooting, like the Levi Morgans of the world and stuff like that, he's like, they ain't using drop away rests. He's like, you know why? Because it's something that could fail. Like, why are they going to leave that to risk?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like, so what they're using, he called it a snake tongue maybe or something like that, where it's
blade.
Like, yeah, it's like it just sits up there and it shoots, and when the arrow comes through, it folds down. It's not mechanical. It just like the arrow. I think the don't quote me on this, but I think the arrow knocks it down, like as it's going through. It's almost like a whisker biscuit, but it's just holding the arrow and that's it, right? And it's just stiff enough to hold the arrow, and then it falls away whenever the arrow goes through it or whatever. He was like, why? Because if you're shooting for a $40,000 check, do you want the fact that the rope on your drop away arrest slightly moved whenever you were between the last round and the next round?
Yeah.
And now you're shooting an inch low.
Yeah.
Or an inch high or whatever, right?
What it is, it's a blade. It actually doesn't move. It's on a forward angle.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And your veins run on either side of it.
Okay.
And the only reason I know this, I'm shooting the Lancaster Archery tournament this year.
Oh, okay, nice.
And so I don't even think we talked about this. No. I just set up a target bow at the shop.
Nice.
It's sick. I'm hoping Lancaster happens. They haven't announced if it's going to happen or not. Pennsylvania just changed their mandate. So I'm hoping it happens because I'm shooting my first tournament there, which I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, so that blade is fixed at a forward angle.
There
so
your
veins run on either side of it. Nothing's moving.
Right. So what he does, he uses a whisker biscuit. Because he's like, people will make fun of it because it's not the fancy equipment or whatever. He's like, but it doesn't move. He's like, you can freaking pound nails with it and it's not going to move. It's not going to fail. It's not going to break. Like, especially if you're out on a hunt out of state somewhere or something like that, not at home.
It's 2 feet per second less.
Right.
So I'm using a whisker biscuit. I literally just did this yesterday. We were testing some bows at the shop. It's 2 feet per second slower.
Right.
And when we're talking high 200s, almost in the 300 feet per second range,
it's nothing.
It's 2 feet per second is nothing to blink your eye at.
Right. And so that's the one thing that he does is he removes all like moving parts.
Yep.
Right. From his setup. The other thing that he does is he shoots single pin, and the way he explains it is that, a deer's kill zone is about 6 inches, right? And so really you just need to be anywhere in that 6-inch range, right? And so what he does, and this is what I ended up doing, and it helped me a ton, was step back to 30 yards, right? And hold your pin on your optimal shot, like in the sweet spot, right? Whether that's the heart or like whatever. Like I kind of look at it as like center mass of lung, right? That's kind of where I'm holding, right? And when you're holding your pin there and you're shooting, you want to shoot and place your single pin at the distance where your arrow is now landing 3 inches below where that optimal shot is, right? Because, so for example, at 30 yards, I think it was, right? So for me, it was setting my pin at 26 yards. At 30 yards, I land 3 inches below my optimal spot, right? The reason being is that whenever you're inside of that range and you're shooting, you'll shoot a little high. It's typically okay because of the angle that you're at, and that you kind of need to hold a little high. Like, so if you're at like 10 yards on a deer and you're holding on the bottom side of the heart or whatever, and you let it rip, it's like, well, that's not where you want it to land. Yeah. Like you actually need to land higher so you can go down through the vitals, right? He's like, so it almost kind of takes care of that angle compensation for you. Yeah. He's like, when you're shooting out to like 30 yards, he's like, I've never known a whitetail to not drop at anything 30 yards and beyond. He's like, so if you hold it on the center spot and you let it rip, he's like, it should drop probably 6 inches. He's like, in a lot of cases, he's like, you're still at the top of the vitals at 6 inches. He's like, if it drops 3 inches, he's like, you're dead. You've pinwheeled it. Yep. He's like, so now it's taking all the guesswork out to where he's like, you don't actually change where you're holding your pin on the animal. Yeah. He's like, you're holding it at the same spot, whether you're at 25 yards, whether you're at 15 yards, whether you're at 30 yards. And that takes time. Like you gotta, which you did. You shot and shot and shot and shot. If anyone follows Clint, we know you shoot your bow. We get it. But it's good. Hopefully one day it'll help. It reminds all of us, like, if that's the way you're going to set your bow up, it's awesome. Yep. It's not foolproof, but it helps a lot. I mean, well, it just takes any of the thinking out. Yep. Like I typically range when I get into a tree and I have a 30-yard ring around me, and I know anything inside of that, I just grip it and rip it, and I don't have to think about what distance is it at, what's it doing, especially like, the one thing I would caveat, and I think Brian even caveated this, is like, he hunts Alabama pressure, right? Even on private, right? Pennsylvania, definitely pressure. A lot of the people who listen to this, pressure. most deer are going to drop at 30 yards and beyond. They're going to have enough time to react a little bit, right? And his point being is that like whitetails, when you watch whitetails, and he's I won't say study this, but he has, because he's hunted all over the world.
Yep.
And so he's actually watched how different animals load whenever they hear a shot go off.
Yeah.
And you'll never see a whitetail load up and forward. They always load the rear legs. So they load down and back.
Yep.
Like, so when they go to move and they get spooked, they load down and then they fall back because they're just going to use gravity to their advantage to get going, you know? And so that's kind of what he takes into account whenever he's thinking about that.
Yep.
And so what his setup really has done for me is like, I no longer have to think. It's just make the shot.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's it. It's no like hold this high off,
like
hold this low or whatever. It's just let it fly.
Yeah. Yeah. I changed my broadheads even this year.
Right.
The broadhead I was shooting was super hard to get. And so I'm like, well, I'll just try something new. And this was in the summer when I was just managing does. And so, man, I was making some huge holes with these broadheads that people trash all the time.
Right.
And so I was like, I love this broadhead. And it's a mechanical, and Greg Litzinger posted a picture of his arrow and was like, fixed blades are better, changed my mind. I immediately posted a picture of my mechanical and a dead deer, and I'm like, mechanicals are better, changed my mind. I like both. I've shot both.
Right.
It's the biggest question we get in the archery shop. What broadhead should I shoot? Any blade you shoot properly through the vitals of a deer will kill it.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, you can shoot a dull blade through. Now, it may not kill it as efficiently or ethically, but you have to find something that in your mind, will work.
Yeah.
Because the reality is they're all going to kill deer, maybe some differently than others, but I have no discrimination. It's been so cool this year shooting 10 deer, a bunch of deer with my bow, and every single one I'm confident and in my gear and in my setup. I took my son out. He turned 5 and he wanted to hunt in a tree stand for the first time. Now, he wasn't hunting. He was just coming with me.
Right.
Put a binocular harness on him, filled it with snacks. It was awesome. I'm like, we're not going to see any deer, but he's going to have the best time ever. He had a harness on. He was strapped to a tree. He looked like a little killer. Well, wouldn't you know it, here comes some does. And he's like, I see some deer. Now, he can barely see over it's a double stand, and he can barely see over the rail. And I look, and sure enough, there's some deer coming. But they were a little farther out, so 42, 43 yards, standing their feet and not a care in the world. Wind was loud, coming straight in our faces. So I shoot this. He grabs my leg, and he's like, killer. I was like, oh, boy, my son. He's already like real amped up about hunting.
Right.
And so I draw, and they start to walk, and so I stopped it. And as soon as she stopped, I just hear my son go, shoot her, Dad. And I'm like, no. So I let it rip. I shoot her. She didn't drop, and I hit right where I wanted to hit. She goes about 40 yards behind us into the field because we're facing into the woods, and dies behind us. And so I said, hey, before we go look for blood, I saw her die. He did not see her die. I'm like, we're going to go back to the truck, take your harness off and stuff, and then we'll go find some blood. We walk in the field right past this deer. He's so excited to go get a snack out of my truck and then go back to the arrow. Right. We literally walk around. I'm like, the deer's whatever. Okay. We go right by the deer, and then he's like, let's go find some blood. But it was cool having an opportunity. I mean, 42 yards was a longer shot. Right. But everything, when I talk about shooting a deer at a further distance, there's certain things need to happen. Head's got to be up. They got to be preoccupied. And it actually helps if there's other deer around. I've found that when there's solo deer, there's so much more on alert. Yeah. So, yeah, it was a cool experience hunting with my son for the first, or it was the second time hunting, but.
Yeah, I've used mechanicals in the past. I've killed deer with them in the past, and, they worked. They worked fine for me. I think the biggest thing for me was like when I started going, made a trip out west and stuff like that, and you start dealing with bigger animals and stuff like that. And look, I know guys will kill bigger animals with mechanicals as well. The biggest thing that sold me on shooting a fixed blade was I was listening to a podcast, and a guy was talking about just like archery equipment setup. Yeah. And he was talking about, the amount of weight people pull, and that like people get overdrawn or over poundage their bow or whatever because they want to be tough guys or whatever, right? And that it's just more about being able to be efficient with your equipment. And then so they started talking about broadheads as well. And what he basically said was like, he's like, look, for a guy, and I don't remember the exact like numbers he gave, so I'll just give that caveat here. It's like, this isn't precise, but it's like, this is the generality they provided. And my numbers are probably slightly wrong, but it's in this range. He's like, if you're a guy who is pulling, a 28 or better draw length, he's like, and you're shooting 70 pounds, he's like, you can use a mechanical all day.
Yep.
He was like, because the energy you're going to lose to open that mechanical, he's like, you're able to overcome that because of your draw length and the poundage that you're pulling.
Yeah.
He's like, for a guy or a woman who has a draw length below that and is pulling lower than that. So if you're at, like me, for example, 26.5-inch draw, Tyrannosaurus Rex arms, right? I used to pull 70 pounds. Now I think I moved down to like 64 or whatever. He was like, if you're pulling less than 28 inches, you should not be shooting a mechanical.
Yeah.
If you're less than 28-inch draw length.
Yep.
He's like, especially, when you start dipping below 70 pound, draw or whatever. For me at 64, he's like, because you're already losing so much, energy from the bow just because of my physics or my physical limitations or whatever. He's like, you can't afford to lose the energy you're going to lose to open that broadhead on impact.
Yeah.
He was like, so for that reason, he's like, anyone like me, for example, he was like, I would never recommend someone like me to shoot a mechanical broadhead.
Yep.
He's like, I just think you're begging for failure at some point.
Yeah.
He was like, now, like you, for example, with your draw length and
28 and a half.
Yeah. And your poundage, he's
draw.
like, you probably won't have a problem with it. He's like, but for someone like me or a woman per se shooting same draw length at like 45 pounds, it's like, you're gonna have problems. Is essentially what he was saying.
There's some new women's bows that just came out by a couple different companies, and they've done some amazing things in the ladies' bow. Mm-hmm. They're throwing some serious heat, which is
Are they?
Oh, it's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, I sold one to a guy the other day because he had a shorter draw length, and the speed coming out of this quote unquote woman's bow was better than he could get out of a quote unquote man's bow at a shorter draw. So it was cool. Yeah, It was nice. They got some cool things going for them.
Heck yeah, man. Well, I've kept you here for like an hour and a half, so I think we'll go ahead and get this thing wrapped up. Get you home to your family. Is there anything? Where can people find out more about you? Where can they follow you? Because you and I are going to hopefully take some trips this year.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we've got a goose hunt or two in our future.
Yes.
This year coming up, and then we'll see what happens in the spring. But hopefully, we've got some turkey hunts coming up too.
Yeah. Instagram is at Wilson.McSwain.
There you go.
And LinkedIn. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I have a LinkedIn account, but I don't know. I haven't been on it in years. So
right. Yeah.
If you want to find me on LinkedIn, my name's Wilson. That's the only other one I got. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, with that, let's shut this thing down. Thank you all for listening. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tether, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.